In part two of this two-part series on the Naturehike wood stove for hot tent camping, we're going to do the initial burn-in and see just exactly how good this stove really is. Stay tuned. So everything is set up. This is over 2 meters tall with the height of the stove added in. And what we're going to do is set the fire for its initial burn-in. We'll begin with a bit of kindling. And a fire lighter. And because of the space in here, I'm not going to put the logs in just yet. What I'm going to do is let the kindling alight. These pieces are big enough, they'll make a little bit of a nice ash bed, and then we can put the first log in. Fire lighter is lit. There's a bit of a breeze today, and that is making the pipe wobble a little bit, but not very much, and that's a good news. I haven't bothered to tie it down from the spark arrestor, and of course we don't have it going through the tent, so it's just held on here. And although there's a little bit of a wobble, there's not much. In fact, I can already, oh wow, that's already heating up very, very nicely, and some flames are beginning to spark up, and it's starting already. Yeah, the stovepipe is starting to heat up. I'm able to touch this now. In a few minutes, it'll be simply too hot to touch. But this is working correctly now. Air is already being drawn up, which means I close the door. I have the dampener open full and the front air intake open full, because of course when you first light something like this, you want to give it as much airflow as possible to really get the fire going. And a little while, I can already feel heat radiating off this now. In a little while, we'll add the first log. So this is giving off a lot of heat, and as you can see, there's already some discoloration to the titanium. This is expected and desired because, of course, this means we are seasoning it in properly. One thing about any sort of new stove like this is you do have to do an outdoor burn-in before you use it in a tent. There are chemicals and so forth that are on this coming from the manufacturing process. And when you burn it off, and I can smell them just vaguely now, there are a few fumes from any sort of machine oil or whatever else that may still be on there. Any sort of coatings to protect it or whatever. When you burn this in, all of that burns off, and you want those gases to escape in an open environment. Once it's been properly burned in, to use it again in future in the tent represents no particular hazard in terms of fumes being given off by this thing, because those have been burnt off already. That kindling is doing rather well. This wooden knob does make it easy for me to open the door without having to wear a glove. And I'm going to add an actual log into there. And that should catch fairly quickly. Obviously, I'm using, this is the sort of wood we use in my fireplace at home, and so this is kiln dried. Obviously, if you're in the field and you're collecting wood from the environment, you want to think about standing dead wood would be the ideal thing to use. You don't want to use green wood, that won't burn very well. But dead wood, particularly if it hasn't hit the ground yet, tends to be very, very dry, almost as dry as this stuff, so it will burn quite well. And this is one of the advantages, of course, to having something like this in your tent. If you're burning wood on a camping trip, If you're only taking dead wood, because that's the only kind of wood that'll burn well anyway, you're not having to carry in fuel. You do need to be thinking about how you're going to dispose of the ashes, but again, when we empty this of its ashes, we'll be doing it, well, you can, for example, either have a small, depends where your environment you're in, you might dig a small little pit to put the ashes in, then cover them up, which can actually be quite good for plants anyway. So that's not necessarily harming the environment, it might even be benefiting it. Alternatively, you can bag your ashes and carry them out. You may even choose to carry them out to use them in your own garden at home, because again, ashes can be good for plants. So that log is already, I can see, starting to catch. This is giving off a nice bit of heat. We'll give this a few minutes to go. We're going to burn both of these pieces ultimately because we want to give it a good seasoning. And as I say, seeing the color change in the titanium is very encouraging. It's actually showing where it's hottest. Incidentally, these two X's not only help prevent it from distorting, but actually give you two locations where you can put food if you're cooking, depending on the size of your pots. If you have a larger pot, you might need to go right in the middle. But if you have a couple of smaller pots, that's going to be the hottest part, and that's a little bit less hot. So depending if you're trying to bring something to a boil, or just go for a simmer, that's going to be one aspect. You will actually have a lower temperature on the surface in the front than in the back, because the air currents are drawing the heat up to the chimney pipe, making the rear portion a little bit hotter than the front. One problem which can occur when you're burning in a stove for the first time is with thin titanium sheet. As you know, it can distort and be distorted by the heat. As a result, it becomes a little softer. So this chimney pipe was beginning to lean backwards in a way that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. Again, normally it would be braced from the top and from the middle when it's going through the stove jacket and having the tie-ons on the top. So that wouldn't normally be an issue. But between the bit of breeze that we have today and the fact that this is only attached at the base, I was becoming a little bit concerned as it was leaning back, and I didn't want to risk any serious distortion resulting from that. So I've taken this garden hoe, planted it in the ground a little bit, and I have it just leaning up against the pipe, just enough to hold the pipe dead straight, so it's no longer leaning back, which could distort the top of the stove. Getting a permanent distortion at the top because of something like the burn-in just went a little wrong because I didn't brace it. It doesn't seem like a good idea. But this is a simple way. If you are doing a burn-in and you are outside and in your garden and you're concerned about the pipe leaning, this is a simple way of bracing it. Not a permanent fix, just a temporary one, but enough for this particular occasion. Just a little tip. So far, the burn-in is going extremely well. As you can see, the discoloration is moving towards the front of the unit, and so it is actually getting heated up rather nicely. And as long as it is this hot, I might as well take this opportunity to, we have just over half a liter of water in here, and I might as well avail myself of the opportunity to make a nice cup of tea. So I've added the other log, and that should actually get this going really nice and hot and well. One thing I am noticing is that it's burning comparatively slowly. I'll just pump that a bit more, get a bit more airflow in there. It does seem to burn the wood nice and slowly. It's not consuming it too quickly. And this is a good thing because you want it to burn for a good long time. Another thing I've noticed is I've not seen a wisp of smoke coming out of the body of this or anywhere along the chimney pipe, except for out of the spark arrestor, which is the apex of the chimney, which is where we want the smoke to come out of. So if you have this in a tent, if it burns anything like this when it's in the tent, and why wouldn't it, you should have a nice, clean, smoke-free environment inside the tent, with all the smoke being taken out and vented up the top of the chimney pipe. The wind having picked up a bit, I've used a simple little coil of baling wire to just hook the actual stovepipe to the hoe, which is planted in the ground, just to prevent it from wobbling excessively. Seems to be a simple solution for an otherwise annoying problem. And it would seem the water's just coming to the boil. So I've got a nice little teapot here, into which we'll add the boiling water. And just give that a couple of minutes to, well, say a minute or so to stew, and just come out nice. This, by the way, is also another Naturehike product. It's their hiking tea set. It's one of the reasons why I decided to buy this, because this is extremely well made as well, but that's a review video for another time. That said, by the way, this is not a Naturehike one. This is also a titanium kettle. Different brands, so I'm not just, as I say, focusing on one brand, but I have to admit there are certain brands that do seem to do a really good quality job. This happens to be one of them, because so far this is performing absolutely beautifully. Nice tea, and being a double-walled cup, not too hot to hold. This stove is working extremely well. Even with the damper on full open and the front vent fully open, the wood is still burning beautifully, but relatively slowly. And obviously, I can slow it down further by partially, don't do that with your fingers, partially closing your vent, and before I make the same mistake twice, partially closing the damper. Everything is very, very hot. Touching it, bad idea. The only thing that's not too hot on this, by the way, is that wooden knob. So I can open and close this quite nicely. So that wooden knob does provide a really nice bit of insulation. So if you're in a hot tent at night, sleeping, using this to keep warm because there's snow outside, it's sub-zero, and you need to open this up to put a log in, that is still a relatively safe operation. No smoke is escaping anywhere but where I want it to. Having dampened this, it's now going to burn a little bit more slowly than it was, and quite frankly, I'm very impressed. And although I'm seeing discoloration, I'm not particularly seeing any distortion. Admittedly, I did have to affix the chimney pipe with it just being loose like this, especially there being a breeze, and especially this getting hot, it does tend to wobble about in a way that was a little precarious. But frankly, even with the least bit of anchoring, it stays pretty much stock still. So I have every confidence that with it being partially held in place by the point of the stove jack that it goes through, held in place down here, and of course with the 3 guy lines to attach to the very top of the chimney at the spark arrestor, I really have a lot of confidence that this will simply sit still and perform its job absolutely beautifully. I'm going to burn these two logs that are in here, and when these the flames die back and we just have a coal bed, I'm going to put another log in there because I want to give it a really good initial burning. And then when all of that is burned out, what I'm then going to do is let it cool down. Now, one thing about titanium, because it's thin sheet, once the flames go out, this unit will cool down very quickly. Hot as it is now, it doesn't take long to cool. Unlike something like cast iron, for example, which could take many hours to cool, this will only take 10-15 minutes once the flames are out entirely. At that point, we will disassemble, remove the ashes. We'll get an idea of how much ash it produced, and then we'll see how easily it folds back into its case. And as an experiment, we'll take it out of its case and set it back up again to see how easy it is to set up once it has been burned in. I know with some stoves, the distortion to the titanium can make it a little bit tricky, but hopefully with this, there'll be no particular issues. But overall, so far, so good. Having largely burned down to a coal bed, I'm just going to add one more piece of firewood. We want to make sure the burn-in is done well. And I'm going to open the vent just a bit to help it catch. And then we'll go back to half open and let that one burn out. It's already starting to catch. In fact, if I just open the door so you can get a better look, we're starting to get some, if we open the door, we're getting some smoke out, so we don't really want to do that. With the door closed, the air is venting in the correct direction, and I think you can see it's already starting to catch pretty good. There we go. So that log should take a little while to burn out, and then when everything's burned out, we'll have burned those 3 bits of log. In fact, actually, I'm going to close this back to the half vent position. Yet another good use for the Victorinox Swiss Champ pliers, keeping me from having to touch that very hot knob there. But we'll let that burn out, and when it has, we'll see how much ash is in there as we disassemble everything and see how well it goes back in its case, and then how easily it reassembles having been burned in. Stay tuned. One rather pleasing thing that I've noticed is now that the fire has dampened down a little bit and is burning a little more slowly, instead of having lots of smoke coming out of the top of the chimney, what we're actually getting is a lot of hot air, no doubt with some clear smoke in it, but overall, this is burning really gently and really beautifully. still warm to the touch, barely. There are still a few glowing embers at the bottom of this, but the legs are actually cold. Although this is quite warm, it's, as I say, not especially hot. This already isn't too bad. I'm about to take this off, and then we'll take this over, dump out the ashes. There'll be a few coals, but that's fine. And we'll see how much ash was left at the bottom of this. So, to begin with, actually going to pull the whole assembly off. We'll come back to this in a little bit when we roll it up. It's quite cool to the touch now. Okay, that's pretty much all of the ash, and it's not a particularly great deal. There are a few coals here that are still glowing. Where they are here in my garden, they'll be quite safe and they can just be allowed to burn out. Ordinarily, if you were actually camping, a good idea would have been to dig a small hole, pour these into there, and then pour some water in after it. But as I say, they'll be quite safe where they are right now, so these could be allowed to just burn out. But the stove is largely fairly cool. What is good about this is it does mean that if your fire burns down to the point where it's no longer heating your tent, you've still got a good coal bed, so you don't have to start a fire from scratch. You put the next log in, perhaps you use a pocket bellows to blow some air into it if needs be, but you can keep your fire going all night long. If you have logs about the size of my forearm, a dozen or so of those will be enough to keep your tent warm all night. No problem at all. So overall, very pleasing. Let's tell you how well this collapses down now. So, time for disassembly. You loosen the two front screws. Move the slides into the middle position. Out that comes. Same on the rear end. That comes right out as well. And having a look at this, it's a little more ash. I'm just going to shake that out. But basically, when you look at this, unlike, and I was hoping this would be the case, I didn't know if it was going to be the case. Unlike a lot of titanium stoves, this one has not significantly distorted. In fact, from what I can tell, looking at all the panels, there's been no distortion at all. Everything is exactly as it should be. So this will pack away and unpack without any difficulty at all. If I just take apart the stovepipe and cut yourself once, that's an unfortunate accident. Cut yourself twice, that's unforgivable stupidity. So this time it's the leather gloves. Move the band out of the way. That's kind of stuck on, so we're going to loosen everything first. And I'm just going to slide the bands away from that. come off. And I'll continue. Let's work on this and just do one at a time. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the discoloration or patina on this is closer to the fire. So, for example, there's quite a lot of patina on the bottom end, very little on the top. That's normal. That's nothing to worry about, and there's no reason to be concerned over that at all. But it does mean you have a nice little visual aid as to what's the top and what's the bottom. I can actually feel through the gloves sliding along this edge, and I'm rather glad I'm wearing the leather gloves now. And once all of those bits come off, this opens up. Now you'll notice there's some black on the inside. This is soot, and that soot came from the fire. And that's normal, again, and we'll give that a little bit of a clean first before we roll this up. So, just using a damp paper towel to deal with it. Again, line the edges, but this stuff comes off very, very easily. Probably best to stay on top of this, but that is a real black soot. But again, a bit of work with this damp paper towel will get most of that away. Once you've gone over it with the damp paper towel, go over it with the dry one. Obviously, this is something to do when you get home from something unless you have a reasonably flat, good surface when you're actually packing up. But once you get the worst of that soot out, you don't really have to worry about it too much. It's now going to just dry nicely. One thing I will say, it does, look on this end, as you can see, it's a lot cleaner down here, a lot sootier as you go along. Near the base of your chimney pipe, it's considerably hotter, so all that soot burns away and leaves little or no ash at all. Higher up, where the air temperature is by comparison much cooler, a certain amount of soot does build up. Now, if you left this long enough, you could end up with a bit of a mess on your hands, but to be fair, it's very easy to clean, and if you stay on top of the maintenance, it won't be a problem. You will wind up with slightly dirty fingers, but again, if you've got the surgical gloves, that would be a good time to wear those. I should have done that this time. But you don't really have to worry too much. And again, taking things like the door and just using the paper towel or the back just to get that excess ash off works extremely well at cleaning that up. You can give the inside of the stove a quick wipe down as well, and then you're not worrying about bringing in a lot of ash into the situation. So once again, just a very quick wipe with the paper towel takes all that dirt out, and okay, yes, you can tell it's been burnt in there, but it's not so bad. Relatively clean. So unusually for a titanium stove, there's basically been no distortion of the metal at all, having been burned in. Usually it'll be twisted in some way. Locking it together will undo that, but here there's nothing. These curved shapes on it have done exactly what I hoped. It's given it a type of support, these hinges and the curves, no distortion. So I'm going to very quickly assemble the front and back plate on to test to make sure those go on and off easily. And after that, we'll be ready to pack this thing up. So we'll begin with the back plate. Move on to the front plate, the door. And that one is just moving, so let's have a look. Give that a little adjust. Okay. other side's misbehaving. Oh, nope, there it is. So there we go. Within a matter of seconds, it's come back together, just as you would hope it would be. And yeah, that's absolutely fine now. No issues at all. So this is actually a really good design. If I take that off, remove the front panel, remove the back panel, close the legs, and we're now going to roll up the chimney pipe. And this is time to put the gloves back on. Just rolled up the short way very easily, but before we pack this away, I'm going to unroll this and just see how easily it goes the long way, because as you saw earlier, that very first time you do it, it's a bit tricky. But now that it's been burned in, let's just have a look at how it does. And there we go. It rolls into this round shape very, very easily. It'll roll up on both planes now, so when you're taking it out, it's going to be far easier to use now than it was the very first time we did it. Because it rolls up so easily, it makes putting it away relatively simple. Again, everything just nests together super easy. If I take the two front and rear panels, these can go in diagonally. And again, we have the wooden knob near the front. Put in the stovepipe assembly in the middle. Concertina down. Make sure the wooden knob is not being interfered with by the stovepipe. And that's it. It's packed down. All it needs now, take the instructions out and put them back in again. All we need to do now, slide it in. Zip it up, and we are good to go. My final impressions are very positive. This stove worked extremely well, not just meeting my expectations, but exceeding them. I highly recommend this. It's a bit different from a lot of the other stoves, but it's the difference that's worth having. They can be expensive. It depends where you buy them. I bought mine directly from AliExpress, and I bought it during a sale. It is also available on eBay, I've seen, and there it is a little bit more expensive. I mean, depending on where you're buying this, you could spend as little as $250 or as much as $600-800. Anywhere between 2.5 and 3.500, I would say, is a good price for this. You can pay double that, as I say, so you have to sort of shop around a little bit and maybe aim for the sale. But it is a good product at a reasonable price. It's one of the less expensive of the titanium stoves, to be fair, and one of the lightest. And I would say reasonably sturdy, and it performed extremely well, even without having the extra support. Okay, we had to use the hoe to simulate the tent. But if you are having it in a tent, and it's going through a stove jack, and it's being held by the stove jack, and also if you use the guy lines at the top, I don't think it's going to give you any problems at all. I'm very pleased with this purchase, and I'm glad I made it. It was a bit of a risk doing it without being able to watch a proper review. A risk hopefully you don't feel you now need to take, because now you know what it's like having seen a proper review. You'll see this more in future camping trips where I'm going to use it in earnest with my iron wall tent. And I hope to see you again in the near future. If you enjoyed this video, please click like. Please consider sharing and subscribing. And hit the bell icon if you subscribe so you can see the new videos as they drop. Hope to see you again soon. Have a good one.